Good day. Thank you very much for the invitation from the Huésped Foundation to me to share with you today some new information, what we understand about new strains, resistance, and vaccines to SARS-CoV-2. So let's start by looking at the landscape of COVID-19 vaccines. We know that we have seen quite a miraculous level of scientific development, to the extent that vaccines that we would normally take years to develop have now been developed for SARS-CoV-2 just in a matter of 9 months. To date, we have 8 widely approved vaccines. We have several that are already under limited use, under emergency use preconditions. We have several more in phase 3 trials and even more in earlier stages of development. But I've listed for you here the 12 vaccines that are being used in various parts of the world, and these are the most well-known of the vaccines that are currently available. And I'm sharing with you here the 4 classes of vaccines. So we have mRNA vaccines made by Pfizer and Moderna. We have viral vector vaccines. These are vaccines like the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the Sputnik vaccine, and the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. Then we have protein vaccines. These are protein subunits. They are just the spike protein of the virus. And these are, for example, the vaccine made by Novavax. And then we have whole inactivated viral vaccines. And the ones that are most widely used are those from China, Sinopharm and Sinovac. So all of these vaccines have been shown in various clinical trials to be safe and effective, and this is what we are rolling out across the world. One of the most important effects of the vaccine is that what we are seeing is a dramatic decline in hospitalization and deaths among vaccinated individuals. So if you look at the data from the UK in the red bars, this is their second wave. And if you look at the left-hand side, this is the cases per 100,000 population across the different age groups. Now, if you compare this left bar to the third wave's left bar, so the second wave was driven by the Alpha variant, and the third wave was driven by the Delta variant, you can see that the UK had a similarly severe second wave and third wave when it came to cases. The number of tested individuals who were found to be positive and reported. However, if you look at the right-hand side, which is the deaths per 10 million population, you can see how in the second wave, when vaccinations were not widely available, you can see what a large number of deaths there were, especially in the older populations. Look at the third wave, though, a dramatic difference. What we're seeing is across the board, low rates of death, and including among the eldest of the individuals getting infected, we're seeing very few deaths. And so that's been the dramatic effect of the vaccines, that they are saving lives, even though they're not saving that many infections, but they are saving lives. So what else do we know about vaccines? What can they achieve? Well, in this study, which comes from healthcare workers, if we look at what was found, was not only that the vaccine, this is the mRNA vaccine by Pfizer, not only was it found that the vaccine was highly efficacious at about 91% efficacy. In other words, only 1 out of 10 individuals in the active arm who were exposed actually had clinical symptoms. And even for those who only received 1 dose of the Pfizer, we saw quite good protection amongst those who were partially vaccinated. But what is also interesting is, compared to unvaccinated cases, the cases that occurred in those individuals who were vaccinated, they had lower viral load. In other words, they had less virus in the throat and the mouth. So they are less infectious. Also, that these individuals had a shorter duration of their viral RNA. So if you take a vaccinated person getting infected, they have less virus that they create in their nose and mouth, and they do so for a shorter period. But it also impacts on clinical illness, on severity. What was found amongst those who were vaccinated, they have fewer cases of fever, and they have a shorter duration of symptoms. So what we're learning is that not only do vaccines do really well in preventing death, they also do quite well in terms of reducing the amount of virus and the amount of infectiousness, and they also reduce the severity and the duration of illness. Shortly after we found that the Pfizer vaccine was effective, within a month or so, we had the first announcement from the UK of a new variant. Shortly thereafter, in South Africa, we announced the Beta variant. And subsequently in Brazil, we found reports of the Gamma variant. And then in India, earlier this year, in March, the Delta variant was reported. And what's becoming clear is that over the last 6 months, we've had the emergence of many of these different variants. And some of them, and these 4 in particular, Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Delta, are variants of concern. They are variants that are either transmitting faster, escaping immunity, or causing more severe disease. And so when we look at these 4 variants, these are the variants we are concerned about, because these are the variants that are now spreading throughout the world. And how much are they spreading? Well, let's look at that after we first address the question of why is it variants occur in the first place? Well, if we look at SARS-CoV-2, that SARS-CoV-2 shows slow genetic drift, just 1 or 2 mutations a month. That's pretty standard, and it's got a proofreading step, so it doesn't really mutate that much. But occasionally, there's a genetic shift with many mutations, and those lead to new variants. And the reason why these new variants emerge is because there's persistent long-term acute infection in immunocompromised individuals. And these immunocompromised individuals with past infection or vaccination, they run the risk of leading to variants with immune escape. Now, most new variants, of course, will have no real functional advantage, so they will just die off. But sometimes a variant has an advantage, especially if it's got higher transmissibility. And if you look at the diagram on the left-hand side, you can see how the Beta variant, from being non-existent in September last year to becoming close on to 90% of all the viruses in South Africa by December. So these variants have high transmissibility. They outcompete the other variants. So let's look at one particular case. This is from a patient in South Africa. In this patient was severely immunocompromised, had uncontrolled HIV, a very low CD4 count, just 6 cells per microliter, and a high viral load of around 34,000. And in this individual who became infected with SARS-CoV-2, CT value was 18.5, so quite a high viral load. What was interesting was that over the duration of 7 months, this individual had persistent SARS-CoV-2 infection. And repeatedly, we were able to culture the virus from her swabs. And so what was happening over these 7 months is that during that persistent infection, I'm going to show you just now how some mutations occurred. Interestingly, in this particular patient, when she was switched to a dolutegravir-containing regimen, she controlled her HIV viral load. You can see that in the blue line. And while she did that, she immune reconstituted, and so she cleared her SARS-CoV-2, as you can see in the orange line. So in this particular individual, what we've seen is that while she was immunocompromised, she had persistent infection. Is when she was treated, she was reconstituted, she cleared her SARS-CoV-2. So what happened in those 7 months? Well, what we found at differing time points, at multiple time points in this patient, is that in this particular individual, she originally was infected with a D614G variant virus. But where by day 6, she had developed a key mutation at position 484. She shortly thereafter also developed, on day 71, developed a 417 mutation, and later on, by day 190, a 501 mutation. So these 3 mutations, 417, 484, and 501, are the 3 key mutations that make up the beta variant. In effect, over the 7 months, we saw in this individual how she was able to recreate the key mutations that make up the beta variant. Interestingly, she also had multiple resistance genes to various antiretrovirals that are effective against HIV. So what we're seeing in immunocompromised individuals is the way in which these new variants are created. And this has been described in a range of individuals who are severely immunocompromised. Individuals with lymphomas and cancers, individuals who are on immunosuppressant therapy for transplants, all of these individuals who are immunocompromised, the virus is able to evolve and create new variants. So if we look at the variant we're currently dealing with, the Delta variant, this variant is fast becoming the world's most dominant strain. It is spreading wildly across the world. Interestingly, South America is one of the few parts of the world where Delta has not really taken hold to any significant extent yet. But across the world, Delta rules. So why is Delta more infectious? Well, the first thing is that the mean CT value in patients with Delta variant compared to non-Delta variants in breakthrough cases, we see a higher viral load. In other words, the CT value, the number of cycles required in the PCR, is lower because there's more virus. So higher viral load translates to more infectiousness. But also, individuals who got infected with the Delta variant, they also were PCR positive for longer periods. We found that those individuals with Delta were infectious on average for 18 days, compared to the ancestral strains, the strains that existed before Delta, that were only detectable for 13 days. So you have more virus and you have it for longer. And so what that leads to, that when Delta occurs, the clusters are of a much larger size. Many more people get infected from one infectious individuals. But we're also finding that with Delta, there's a risk of reinfection. So in other words, if you've been infected previously naturally, you have almost a 50% higher chance of getting infected again. And this is partly because the Delta variant is able to evade the immune system. And I'll come back to that in a minute when I talk about cell-to-cell transmission. But what we've also seen is that if you are vaccinated and you get infected with the Delta variant, the CT value, the amount of virus, is similar in vaccinated and unvaccinated individuals. You can see the CT values are similar, 21.9 versus 21.5. So even vaccinated individuals can be infectious and spread the disease to others. So what is the impact of these variants? Well, I'll use just 3 countries to illustrate the impact. This is India in the first diagram, Brazil in the second diagram, and South Africa in the third diagram. In each of these countries, they've had their first wave. First wave wasn't particularly severe in India. It's been quite severe in Brazil, even somewhat severe in South Africa. So if we look at those three countries, in each of these three countries, a new variant emerged. In India, we saw the emergence of the Delta variant and the way in which the Delta variant caused enormous wave that we saw in India. And the pictures that we saw on television were heartbreaking to see how this virus took its toll in India. In Brazil, we saw the Gamma variant emerge, and the Gamma variant created, even before the first wave could be over, created an enormous second wave, the one that's still continuing in effect. And if you look at in South Africa, we had the Beta variant, and the Beta variant led to our second wave. But after the second wave cleared, what we have seen is we are now in our third wave, driven by the Delta variant. So we are seeing how the variants, because of the increased transmissibility, are leading to these waves. So how does it actually occur? Well, if you look at this diagram, in the yellow color is the Beta variant. So the Beta variant emerged in South Africa roughly in around August, September, when we went back and looked for it. But we only detected it in November, when it reached a sufficiently high level. And once it took hold, it remained the dominant form of the virus in South Africa. However, by April of this year, a new sheriff was in town, Delta variant. And this variant, literally in a matter of 2 months, has displaced the Beta variant. And the Delta variant, which is in green color here, the Delta variant is now dominant in South Africa. It accounts for more than 90% of all viral transmissions that we see in the country. So these are viruses that can rapidly wipe out the other variants and become dominant. So what are the implications of the Delta variant? Well, the first, as we've seen, it's more transmissible. Right? It's estimated by Public Health England to be somewhere between 50 and 67% more transmissible than the Alpha variant. And the Alpha variant itself was pretty fast in terms of being highly transmissible. In terms of disease severity, it's not so clear-cut, but several studies have been pointing in the same direction, that we're seeing increased hospitalization, increased ICU admissions, and increased deaths. We've seen that in Canada, we've seen that in Singapore, we've seen that in Scotland. In each of these three countries, they've reported data that show that individuals infected with the Delta variant are more often hospitalized and have a higher risk of death. Now, in other studies, these differences haven't been found, but at this point, let's just say that the evidence leans towards that the Delta variant causes a more severe form of SARS-CoV-2 infection. In terms of immune escape, studies that have been done show that the Delta variant shows about a 4 to 6-fold reduction in neutralization. So in other words, you need more antibodies to kill this virus. You need a higher level of it. Unfortunately, most of our vaccines seem to work quite well against the Delta variant, though with some vaccines, such as the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer vaccine, you need both doses of the vaccine in order to benefit maximally. That vaccine efficacy from the Pfizer vaccine is reduced until you get the second dose. But once you get the second dose, it's still 88% effective for symptomatic disease and 96% effective in reducing hospitalization. So, Delta variant, more transmissible, more severe, escapes immunity, and can even reduce vaccine effectiveness after a single dose only. We see that in different ways. So here I'm sharing with you data from studies done in South Africa, and we've studied 4 vaccines have been tested in South Africa, and I'll share their data with you. But if you look at, for example, the AstraZeneca vaccine, which was shown to be 70% efficacious in the UK, when tested in South Africa during the second wave with the Beta variant, we saw highly reduced efficacy. In effect, what we found was AstraZeneca was really ineffective in preventing clinical illness from Beta variant. If you look at the Novavax vaccine, it was 89% effective in the UK, but only 43% effective in South Africa. Drastic reduction in efficacy. However, we also tested the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in a much bigger study. So both the AstraZeneca and Novavax studies that were done in South Africa were small studies, about 2,000 odd participants. But the J&J vaccine trial that was done in South Africa has a sizable number of individuals, close to 5,000. And there, what we found was efficacy of 64%, which was just slightly lower than what was observed in the US. So this difference between 72 and 64 is not meaningful. It's within the margin of error. Interestingly, the original Pfizer vaccine trial included South Africa. And it's a small part of the study, but in the 400 individuals who've been vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine in the original trial, none became infected in South Africa's first and second wave. No infections of the Beta virus, Beta variant. However, there were about 6 Beta variant infections in the control group. For the Delta variant, we already have found that the Delta variant is not able to compromise the AstraZeneca efficacy. In other words, AstraZeneca remains highly effective against the Delta variant, especially after 2 doses. Similarly with the Pfizer vaccine, as I just pointed out. So we have some clarity now about the efficacy and how Delta variant is able to spread faster, cause slightly severe, more severe disease, is able to evade immunity. But in this study, it showed that the variants, and this applied to the Alpha variant, the Delta variant, and to some extent the Beta variant, that they are able to spread cell to cell. So they don't need to be expelled from a cell into the bloodstream where the antibodies can get to it. Instead, it goes from one cell into another cell, and thereby it can evade the body's antibodies and immunity. And so that's become part and parcel of the challenge we deal with, that this mechanism of transmission within the human body enables the virus to have an advantage in the presence of vaccine or natural immunity. So I hope I've given you a sense of, how our world is changing with new variants of the vaccine, and how the Delta variant has these unusual characteristics and why it is causing the global havoc that we have seen. So what can we expect next? Well, SARS-CoV-2 and its mutations are unpredictable. That's the first thing. We don't know what the next variant is going to look like. And that the 4 current variants of concern, they emerged in the midst of widespread natural infection. And most are able to evade natural immunity with past infection. In other words, they can cause reinfection. However, the next set of variants of concern, they will be emerging in the presence of widespread vaccine immunity. And so we remain concerned. Will the next variants of concern be able to escape vaccines? A question we don't know the answer to. But the future trajectory of SARS-CoV-2 will depend on waning vaccine immunity and viral variants that will escape vaccine immunity. And depending on whether both of these occur or either one of these occur, we are likely to continue to see waves of viral infection. What's likely as a result is we're going to need either homologous or heterologous boosters in the long term. So we don't need them right now, but with waning immunity and the emergence of new variants, we may need boosters down the line in a few years or even months from now. And the central message for me always is that whatever we do and however we are banking on vaccines to control this viral infection, we will also need to continue to use our public health measures like mask wearing. And we're going to need to continue with them even in vaccinated populations. So that's what lies in store. More variants, changes in vaccines, new booster shots, and hopefully with all of those, we will be able to keep this virus in check, at least prevent it from causing many deaths, even if it does continue to cause infections through outbreaks. On that note, it's been a great pleasure to share with you what we know about the virus, vaccines, and the variants. Thank you.